your progression fascinating, Corey, because you move from, let's say, Android to kind of leading teams, and now you're in the head of engineering kind of position at Trainline. How did you go about, like, if someone interested to move from a kind of mobile contributor, like even the point of Joe here, we call it like moving up the ladder into more management position, head of engineering or even CTO levels. Can you maybe go through your experience there, and where were the challenges maybe, and how do you overcome them?
Yeah, definitely. So even early in my career, I was thinking about it as career architecture and being quite intentional about the choices I made to continue to grow my career. I was just doing broad stuff. So I started out in C router code and Python and Django, and then Java backend, and then iOS very briefly. And then because I was at Comcast, that's where I did Java, and then iOS and Android. They had already written the iOS app. Android app was new. So I was like, all right, stuff it. Let's go start something new. So got stuck into that. And it was the infancy of Android. It was in 2010. It was really the Wild West back then. It's hard to imagine now, but there was no architecture guidance. Everything was just constant churn and trying to figure out what the right way to do stuff was. And we were writing one of the first streaming applications. So there wasn't really any prior art to base it off of. So I stayed there for a while. Then I went to a consulting firm to get broader exposure to more Android stuff. And that's when I got into conference speaking. And I used to be extremely shy, and like conference speaking for me is kind of a surprise that I ended up here, because I even like listened to a book that was Speaking with Confidence for the Painfully Shy. And like that's how much I would run from conference speaking and stuff. And now, 15 years later, I'm doing it quite frequently. I'm doing a panel. Prefer to have a scripted talk, but panels are fine too. But yeah, so I did conference speaking as a way to build my personal brand, to connect with people all over the world. Like I've known Carl since, I don't know, 2014-ish because of that, because I came to speak at DroidCon London back in 2012. So it really does give you that breadth of network and that ability to connect with a lot of people. So that keeps my options open. But I kept wanting to stay in the Android space because I found new problems to solve. But after a while, I started seeing that, at least for me, I was solving similar problems and kind of just showing REST responses on a screen, and it kind of lost the magic for me. So I was like, okay, well, I need a new challenge. I did really face struggles trying to move up to not head of Android role, because I had been head of Android, some player coach roles, EM stuff, but no one wanted to hire me as just head of cross-platform team. So I probably didn't have to do this, but it felt like it would be a good rounding out of my tool set to go laterally. So that's why also I moved internationally. So I moved from the States to London with the app business at the time, but now it's called Carter and ultimately now Valtech. So they moved me over. I moved over to do broad stuff and was leading teams. Like one of them was the B&Q e-commerce website and app reboot. It was like, at that point, I hadn't done something that big. So it was really interesting to get the exposure that you get there, and worked with other brands like NatWest and stuff. And then I kind of went up through the leadership ranks there. So I grew up with that organization. And then in my most recent job search, I also found that not only was consulting and Android kind of the summaries people were taking away about me, I'm just an Android consultant. It's like, no, I've been in leadership over 12 years. So I do still find that there's a little bit of pigeonholing. It can be difficult to overcome, but you just have to have really good stories and show the types of problems you can solve and how you've helped organizations move forward. And that can really help if you're good at framing that.
Thank you, Corey. That's fascinating. You mentioned pigeonholing, like the Android position that you hold previously. I mean, do you think it's less appreciated as a skill set? You see, if you aim to move towards more challenges, let's say with cross-functional team, that they look at mobile and think, okay, that's not a difficult challenge technically. Do you think that has something to play with your progression? Or
yeah, I think there's two aspects to it. One, my own imposter syndrome. So I feel like I want to know how to write backend services because I've never written them for production, right? So then there's always a, can you really lead a team that's doing this? So there is a little bit of hierarchy. I think no one really speaks about it and talks about it officially, but it's backend engineers, probably then mobile, then probably web. But like, is it? I don't know. I do think that there's a bit of cachet to backend engineering, the hard engineering stuff. But I think that's also gatekeeping crap too. So there we are.
The hard engineering. Tristan,
Yeah.
Maybe you want to chip in here?
Yeah, well, yes, sure. So my journey is very similar to Corey's to start with, but from the other side, from the light side of the force, I guess, the Apple side. So so I started as an iOS engineer in 2012, sort of when supporting iPod Touch was still a thing. It's still an edge case. I worked my way up from there into a head of iOS position, and then into engineering management. But there was a huge culture shock from going from, say, head of iOS, where you are also a key contributor, and then suddenly into engineering management, where the people are your code. And it's not something you can just fix with a Stack Overflow answer. At the time, there weren't great resources for that. So I spent, the best part of a decade learning people management. And most of the time, I'm finding that it's normally people problems, not technology stack problems. So backend versus web versus mobile. It's actually the people got the right tools to help them to work, but also are they in the right structure? So something I'm quite obsessed with at the moment is organization design as well as a topic. So.
Thank you. I mean, like you mentioned organizational design, and I can see you have like an engineer mindset push to the people
refactoring teams. So, yeah.
And the challenge was more moving from IC to people management. Again, like if you, I'm just trying to sense here, because I experienced a bit the same, where running Novoda, I kind of moved further away from, let's say, my core skill set historically, which also made the business what it was, because I would come in any sales conversation with more knowledge on the platforms than anyone in the room. Well, now that's probably not the case anymore, because I'm older, I have 3 kids, focus on management and other things than, let's say, the latest APIs within the, I don't know, iOS or Android code bases. How do you keep up to date with let's say the platforms, in order for you to take the correct engineering decisions? You see, like, how do you make sure that you understand what's coming up, so you can then decide what's best for your business?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, that's why I stayed really active in the community, organizing events, going on podcasts, also spending a lot of time with my team. I think it comes from within. A lot of the technical decisions, a lot of stuff, great stuff my team have done over the last year, it's their effort, it's their contributions. I've done that, but often you've still got the skills to make the pragmatic decisions. But I find if you really take your eye off the ball of what's going on in the technology space, then it's also quite difficult to get team buy-in to what you're suggesting. So I've seen that as well. People that step away for too long from tech.
Yeah, for me, it's pretty similar, except I do it more through conferences, and I'm just, I love reading. So I'm reading something every day, basically. I also spend a lot of time with the teams, and I listen in a lot of places throughout Slack. So I'm just kind of seeing what's going on in the different communities. For example, we've got internal radars and stuff. So I was checking out our radars this morning to see which areas we're deciding to invest in and not invest in and stuff. In addition to that, unluckily, when I came back from maternity leave at Kin + Carta, we had a large bench. So I was trying to figure out what can we do with all these people. It was about 20, 30 mobile engineers. So then I got very deep in Gen AI, and then ended up spending about 9 months building a ton of projects there. And I've been continuing to engage with that. So then I've kind of ignored all the advances in Android, although I know what they mean from top headline level and stuff, also from my experience there. But everything has changed since the last time I wrote an Android application about 6 years ago. But yeah, still know all the key technologies to look at, but I'm investing more of my time into keeping up to date with some of the AI advances.
Now, how important do you think it's to kind of know those technology stack when you're leading a team that uses those stacks? I mean, not necessarily like, let's say Android or iOS, but including, let's say, backend, you move to kind of more head of engineering. So like taking us that route, how important it is, or is it irrelevant the more you go into leadership position because it's more about people?
I think, well, it's a bit about the people, but also you have the theoretical underpinnings, or at least you've seen a lot of things. So I study computer science, so like I just kind of think of it through that lens. And even though I haven't written .NET services, I don't think I've even worked at a place that did .NET services until I moved to Trainline. So, but I am leading 2 backend engineers on all 7 teams, so roughly like 14 people there. So I lean on my architects in the space and staff engineers and stuff if it's something very deep, but I'm good at translating what technologists say into what the business needs to hear and vice versa. So I'm really good at kind of like distilling what's happening in a conversation and helping people understand why it matters.
Yeah,
thank you. Yeah,
I'm very much the same as well. I've also, it's kind of interesting. Internally, I run the showcases for engineering at NewDay. So all the, whether it's data platform stuff, SRE, stuff like that. And so by organizing that, attending that as well, it's easy to soak up knowledge as well. So it comes from a variety of sources.
Thank you both. Maybe we can move towards like measuring team performances and your team efficiencies, especially when it comes to mobile. I think there were some questions in Slido around this topic. And you know, Trace, you touch on how you see, you know, people management and how you structured those. Maybe maybe what's, and we touched on that as well last time, but which measure, how can you measure the success of your engineering team? And it would be actually quite good as well if you contextualize it with the size of the teams that you're measuring.
Yeah, so at the moment, so we do our measurements. So we've got Grafana board system that measures across team, measures using GitHub telemetry and other services. And often I think normally it's a cop out to say, oh, mobile's different. We don't need to do that. Actually, a lot of the resilience measurements and lead time to production, they just need tweaking slightly. So what you can do, for instance, for lead time to production, you change it to lead time to store, and you measure the time it takes to get an uploaded build to the store, and that's it. So for me, it's all about that factory assembly line. It's how long do each of those iteration steps take. And yesterday, one of my team demoed what we've done with Android pipelines, and they showed sort of a, you know, PR commit build time between 40 minutes down to 15, which is something we've done in the last couple of months. And that actually moves the needle. That means developers are faster, they get faster feedback. If there are defects, they can get fixes out quicker. So for me, it's all about that factory assembly line. I don't want to mention like Elon Musk and his Tesla factories and stuff, but they do have screens at each stage of the assembly line showing efficiency of that stage of the car assembly. And for me, it's very much that release pipeline. How long does it take iterations to be verified, and how long does a release build take? And that feeds into DORA metrics and cycle time calculations. And so it's the context, I guess, as well. So NewDay's engineering team's about 300 engineers. And then my team from that's around 25 or so people. So
yeah, mine's a little bit more complicated because I've got 7 teams, and each of them have an EM. I manage the 2 SEMs that are managing the teams and 2 sub-themes. So I'm kind of at a higher level where I'm looking more at quarterly metrics, and we do get more frequent measurements and stuff. And usually the EMs and the SEMs are managing those day-to-day sort of metrics, and I'm looking at it more of a quarterly perspective. I think, yeah, we do measure a mix of DORA and some other metrics. We have OKRs, and we've created internal dashboards to help us track the business value that we're driving, because I've found that DORA is great for looking at how fast and efficient things are, but it doesn't necessarily translate into business value. So you can't only focus on that, and engineering happiness is a bit more space stuff, all great things, but we want to make sure that we're actually driving something at the end of it. So that's where kind of marrying it up with the OKRs tends to happen for us.
And is there a separation between the mobile team and let's say the backend teams, or when you look at the quarterly metrics, you don't distinguish between the two?
No, I roll it up for my organization. Also, there's like each team is basically 8 people, 2 web, 2 backend, 2 Android, 2 iOS. So each team is kind of cross-functional and delivering a set of features because we're not the platform team. So someone else had asked about org design. So the way that Trainline kind of works is there's one big team that kind of owns the app. Then there's the platform team that kind of sits underneath it. And then LTV kind of builds features on something that already exists. So we plug into the application as it exists, but we're kind of additive features on top. So it's an interesting org design.
And a feature, is that like a feature is done when it's on all platform? Is that how you see it? Or you say a feature team, like how do you measure, let's say, the efficiency or performances of your different feature teams, especially like, again, I guess in the context of mobile execution versus the rest? Because what I've seen, and Chris touched a bit on this, is like it's hard to apply the same measure of efficiency of teams. When, you know, like was a lead time to store, you mentioned Chris there. And so, you know, and so what's the, and again, like just like what's the, how do you measure the efficiency of mobile? And I appreciate you probably higher up than that, you mentioned there, Corey, but maybe if you have experience historically or not around team efficiency, especially when it comes to mobile.
Yeah, I think when I was working in mobile teams, it was still more startup-y and scale-up-y and hadn't got to the point where they were actually mature enough to have any sort of metrics outside of velocity. So that's not something I can speak as deeply to. And like I said, I'm kind of at a bit higher level here. And then also at my last organization, I was running the portfolio of teams. We had 45 projects at any one time. So I wasn't in the teams of those. I made sure that we were delivering for our clients, but each of those teams had their own set of door metrics or whatever. But
interesting. And then you touched on like business value. Is there anything like ratings of stores or similar that you look at from let's say business value perspective, which is very specific to mobile?
Yeah, I would assume that the team that kind of owns the app looks much deeper at the ratings. We look at how much new ticket sales are we driving and how much revenue are we driving, because we're much more of a monetization and growth team where I'm at currently. What about you, Tris?
Yeah, so I think I've also seen it at Amazon. They've got a little customer obsession over one specific number that they can all pivot around. I think that was originally response time to calls. You call in the call center. So for us, it's we've got all sorts of measurements. One of the key one is store rating. So we aggregate our store rating across our apps. We've got an OKR of achieving 4.7, always aiming for 4.8, currently at 4.7 stars. But that helps us all work around that. And then what we've got is Teams integrations where we use a service called App Pop. Anytime a customer reviews the app, it goes straight to this Teams channel. And we acknowledge if it's anything that's product related feature stuff, especially on a backlog, if it's essentially an incident, we can also get insight into that in addition to dashboards and everything else. But I think that obsession over how the app's performing and live proving is critical. But I do also think from a DORA perspective, it's okay to measure to store, because at least that from a development workflow and delivering value, you can make sure that's ironed out. And then if you've got an enormous user base, it can be a bit like that game Operation that you played that when you're younger. But it's quite interesting, open heart surgery, and actually seeing and making sure that you don't cause impact to a large number of customers.
And when it comes to, and there's been some question around the modularity and organizing your code bases, because if you have several teams, obviously interacting with the code base, do you have any suggestions or direction around how to organize your code base in order to have different teams committing to it? Or what's your strategy there?
So we've got a cool strategy there. So we've got a setup in GitHub where it directs specific approver groups to specific feature squads. So if you're committing to certain parts of the repository, so we've got a mono repo for both iOS and Android. So that means that you enforce, double checking. So we need 2 approvers and they need to be within different teams. So the system that works quite well. The bit you sometimes will struggle with though is there'll be features that aren't customer facing features. They're perhaps core libraries, certificate pinning, other bits and pieces where, where does that sit? Because it impacts all feature squads. So that's where, I built a so my team built a platform support team, sort of in addition to 3 feature squads, where we actually use that to drive the initiatives. And I always analogize it to the Wallace and Gromit film, where Gromit's going along and he's laying out the track ahead. So we're laying out the track ahead so the feature squads can go faster. So yeah, that's worked really well for us.
Yeah, I've seen a few different approaches. So at Capital One, when I was there, we did what we were calling Lego pieces. So we would create very small repos and try and keep them quite segregated. Of course, they got bloated over time. And then we went from 1 team to 10 teams. But the approach did scale quite well. We did have a monorepo, but just for Android, not across all of mobile applications. At Pinterest, it was a similar thing. I found when we had, because I was leading the platform team at Pinterest, we ended up kind of being the police of what could come in, like you said, with the feature approvals and stuff. So that you just have to make sure that you don't get into that sort of place if you do have more of a platform underlying it, so that it feels much more collaborative instead of just saying no all the time, this isn't good enough, and taking a, well, let's improve this together sort of mindset. And then here at Trainline, there is a large platform team, there's the large app team. And so it's a very different way that we've organized, but we try and keep things modular as possible. We've got service ownership and who's owning what. And yeah, there's lots of different features broken up across lots of different teams, roughly about 3 mega teams.
Interesting point of the policing done by the platform team. We've seen that as well. And some organization work with. We also had not sure if you've seen this, and I was quite curious about hearing other with this experience, where the platform team has a technical product owner and the customers are the feature teams. And so you kind of I remember when we were at Glovo, we were building testing SDK, let's say, or deployability for the CI and observability tools, where we would build the kind of SDK, but not the implementation of it, because it's a feature team's responsibility. Have you seen something similar to that? Is that how you function at Trainline or Tris at NewDay?
I've seen another interesting thing. So with NS London, we did an event last year, actually at the Trainline. Great venue, by the way. And one of the interesting things there, we had one of the sort of senior leads for Revolut's mobile team, and he was sort of explaining that they've got 130 iOS developers and 130 Android developers, and what each developer gets a slice of the systems. They get their own, I don't know, Carl app, their own Corey app, Trisup, etc. But they get their own app, and it's their features within that. And then again, in terms of policing, you have to have platform supporting teams making sure the infrastructure is there to allow that. But I do think component teams gets a little bit dangerous, I think, especially when you scale, because then you become dependent on a very large team size to support it. So it can be a challenge, especially with design system and stuff, because then it's not my problem, it's the design team's problem, it's the component team problem, but actually at the end of the day, it's still an app and a piece of software that's delivered to production.
And I'm curious as well from the team organization perspective. From my experience, I remember, and you touch a bit on that, Corey, as well, where you say, okay, well, we have backend developers, web developers, and mobile developers as part of the cross-functional team. My experience is that, let's say, web is closer to backend, and this is within cross-functional team, from an organizational perspective, there's the budget to assign, let's say, at least backend and web capabilities on each cross-functional team. But when it comes to mobile, sometimes it's they're not necessarily present in all team structure out of budgetary constraint, but also of the challenges of the mobile technologies. Have you seen that, or is each team, let's say, within Trainline represented with each technology, and the balance is correct? I'm not sure if my question is clear or not.
Yeah, I think that the balance kind of shifts over time. It also depends on what we're trying to achieve. In my team right now, 6 of the 7 teams do follow that structure. There's a few holes here and there, and one of the teams is focused almost only on web right now, and that's acquiring customers, because often when you're searching for an unfamiliar journey, then you would do that on the web instead of the application. You might not have the app already. So there's a heavy focus there, and that's because that aligns with the business goals for that team. And we're looking at things like MCP and generative search engine optimization and stuff there. But yeah, so I do find that it's difficult, right? Because we're trying, the way they break it up is we have hypotheses that we're going after and OKRs that we're trying to achieve, and then we've got the standard team structures. It does seem to mostly work out, but sometimes we have a glut in one team and not enough people, usually not enough people in the team. So sometimes Android runs ahead, sometimes iOS runs ahead, sometimes it makes sense to test on one versus the other. So we might flip-flop who's doing that particular feature first, but we just try and keep the teams occupied. Not sure if that answers your question. Was a bit.
It does a bit.
Yeah.
Just, do you want to add something, or should we move to the?
Yeah, I think we should end the topic.
Yeah. Okay, so the next topic is you touch on was it GEO? Yeah, and AI and let's say the future of mobile development. I'm curious, maybe you can introduce a bit what you've done, Corey. I mean, when we discussed before the call, I thought that was really interesting. And maybe on how do you bring, let's say, AI with even R&D really into your organization and into your teams?
Yeah, sure. So I'll give you a little bit of background on the Gen AI lab I created. So this is also a wider conversation we haven't had about consulting firms, but it feels like it's a lot harder and more commoditized to sell mobile application developers, and there's a lot more in-house. So I found that we had a really hard time selling our mobile engineers at the consulting firm I was at. And when I returned, this was kind of the low. We had gone through the really high, can't hire enough engineers, everybody's jumping ship, moving to different companies. And by the time I got back from maternity leave, it was like, oh gosh, we've already done 4 rounds of layoffs. And now I've got a bench of 20 mobile engineers to deal with. So I came up with a creative way to use people to not only help them learn new skills, but also to help the business out and try and win new work. So what I ended up doing is creating a Gen AI innovation lab. Basically, I took the people on the bench and created a program, and we took submissions from all across the business for things people wanted to build, so that we were a consulting firm, so we didn't have our own in-house product delivery. I can talk to that in the Trainline context in a minute. But so we were looking at more in workforce innovation. So for example, we built a bid writer to help us pitch for RFPs for government contract work. And then we created all sorts of travel configurators and car configurators and things like that to pitch to a lot of the clients that we were speaking to at the time. So we built about 45 projects in 9 months, and then drove 2 million in new work, and even sold the concept of building an innovation lab to one of our clients as well. So then we went inside and helped them build their own innovation lab and how to determine which projects to invest in and kill, etc. So I found that we were continuing to rewrite RAG architecture from scratch. Also, these were people who didn't have any experience in ML, and often they were mobile engineers, so they often didn't have a lot of cloud or backend experience either, or Python. So there was a big skills jump to get this stuff out the door, and there wasn't things like Cursor and stuff around back then to kind of iterate. So they were all learning together, but I found that we kept building the same thing. So what I did is brought everyone together to be like, hey, why don't we create what I was calling a blueprint? So start a project that you can ramp up quite easily that has all the approvals and stuff, because we were partnered with Microsoft and Google, excuse me, at the time. So I created these safe playgrounds with blueprints so we could do projects more quickly. So that's how we ended up shipping 45 projects in 9 months. And then fast forward now to Trainline. So we're early in our AI journey, but our new CTO is very, he's from a data background, so very AI focused now, which is great to see. When I started about 6 months ago in November, I don't know how much you know about Google search and how that's changing over time, but SEO traditionally isn't something I was super involved with, but getting high rankings in Google was all the rage. That's what you had to do. Now that's really shifting quite heavily towards people searching on ChatGPT, and especially in our business, some of our international users use that quite heavily. There's already high brand saturation in the UK. So it's really interesting on how quickly that landscape is shifting, and no one really knows how to rank super well inside generative search engines. There's some ideas, so I've been pushing the teams to think about that. So we've been working on that for the last 6 months. So we've gotten better at indexing ourselves. We're looking at potentially how do we make sure that we show up well as part of the training set and things like that. So there's lots of different things that we're exploring. And most recently, we started looking at MCP. So like, I have 2 theories. Either the interface is dead, long live the bots. So we need to make it so that the data and transactions and stuff that we do in whatever our company is consumable by bots coming in and being able to interact with, for example, the real estate of Trainline. Or the other one is long live the interface. And that one is like optimizing for operator, which is basically a fake human who will click through your website or maybe even your apps. I don't think it works with apps, but maybe it will soon enough. And pretend to go through and, in our case, buy a ticket. So how do you optimize to make sure that there's not blockers in that path, so that operators can go through, but also so that any of the bots that want to talk to us, we give them what they need as well. And then also we show up when people are searching for us. Yeah. And then also looking at workforce innovation as well internally, like how do we use vibe coding and whatnot to make ourselves more effective. So I've kind of gone all in this space, but yeah, that's been my major focus for about 2 years.
Fascinating. Interface is dead. Just maybe for context, MCP is was it model context protocol, in order for let's say AI agents to be able to use a system. Yeah, it's like, it's kind of a
kind of USB or APIs for the world of AI.
So you would see, let's say, the need of having this type of structure against Trainline. So if a bot require to book something, it knows how to click on the interfaces and achieve that purchase of a ticket.
Theory. We're not there yet, but that's my theory.
Trace, yesterday at the Laundry event, there was quite a bit around that topic as well. Maybe you have a comment on this? And where do you
Yeah, no, I mean, we've been exploring within our, some of it I can't talk about, unfortunately, publicly. But yeah, lots of stuff there with Gen AI. We do have some machine learning engineers at NewDay as well. And we've also been looking a bit at app intents and other ways that Apple and Google are extending the operating system and app so that you can access it a bit without having to open the app, which I think is really interesting. Gio's talk, I thought, yesterday from my team was absolutely amazing. Really set the scene of where we are. I think he had some issues with it because the technology is changing so quickly. Every day he'd have to change the slides. But yeah, it's really exciting to see how AI can help developers with their workflows, but also how it can help customers. And I do think over the next couple of years, or maybe even over the course of this year, the mention of AI within the apps will slowly disappear, and it will be part of the user experience that customers expect a better experience. So I'll be curious to see where that leads as well.
Yeah, I think like I mean, when we're talking mobile is obviously very much around the user experience, like the kind of UI experience as well. You mentioned interfaces there and interacting with services. Where do you see this go? I mean, where should one look at building mobile apps if that's even the future? But like, where do you see the industry go by integrating more of Gen AI tooling everywhere? You know, from your desktop to your mobile application to new devices.
I see it being quite chat and voice driven. Hopefully it gets better. It's been kind of crap, but we're getting there as the major thing. But if you have really deep engaging experiences, that's where I think mobile and web are going to continue to play a strong role. But if it's just serving content, I think that aspect of it is going to fade away a lot more, and it's going to be much more around interesting use cases. Even if you look at what's happened with ChatGPT, they have a partnership with Shopify now, so there's like purchasing items through ChatGPT. I'm sure they're going to continue to evolve that. So then do all people who sell, have a more e-commerce app? Is that going to be needed if most people use ChatGPT? And then trying to figure out what is that moat really, when historically it's been UX. So the reason why people love Trainline is the app is delightful to use, unlike a lot of the other applications out there that allow you to do the same thing. But is that still going to be what defines us? And I would argue that probably not in the next 5 years. I don't know when that might shift, but
it's a
challenging one, isn't it?
Yeah. Do you want to add something there, Tris?
Yeah, I think, where is it all leading? But I can see it leading to amazing user experiences. If you look at like the Meetup app or dating apps, the idea you open it and there isn't a list of matches to swipe from. They know that that's a good match and that's the next level experience. I think I can see that playing a part, but also I can see, where is it? I can't really see everyone just talking to their phone and not actually looking. I think if you look at people on the train home, they're just glued to their phone, reading things, they're looking at things, they're doom scrolling on Instagram. I don't think it's going to go away. I think it's also telling that ChatGPT is the top of the app stores, right? It's the #1 app. So that's how a large portion of users are actually experiencing new AI services.
Yeah, I find it awkward to use voice, but I think younger generations seem to be okay with it. I would text more, but I think more and more things right now we have to fill in forms and click and I'll do all these buttons and stuff. I think a lot of that sort of interaction is going to go away and be made a lot easier by something like a chat interface, or maybe it's another emerging interface.
Or brain interface.
But do you see maybe the let's say the chat experience moving into ChatGPT? Let's say if we take the example of ChatGPT, because you said like within ChatGPT you can purchase, let's say, stuff from Spotify, or from a mobile experience perspective, do you see, let's say, the voice experience moving into Trainline? So let's say you would talk to Trainline, if that conceptually what you would look at.
Trainline, buy me a ticket, buy me my commute this morning.
So you see that more like within the Trainline, kind of you would build that into the Trainline, or would you see the market going more like, let's make sure that ChatGPT has that capability? You see like the difference where?
Yeah, I think I am worried for a lot of businesses and a lot of different industries that may not need to exist in the current form that they're existing in right now in the next 5 years. Now, the next 2 to 3 years, we have time to make sure that we are maximally consumable by every interface that's out there. It's probably what I would suggest doing, like figuring out how we might prepare for the multiverse.
So how do we prepare for the multiverse? You mentioned you had to train your mobile engineering to Python engineering. Is that where we start?
I think it's useful to use the tools that exist now, because like if you think about it, this is the worst they're ever going to be. And there's also, it's not a fad, because there's been about, 75 years of research that led us to this point. So it's not like we just tried to figure it out a few weeks ago, like blockchain, for example, and then just shipped it and tried to find something to do with it forever. I think this has a lot more staying power. So it's behooves you to at least explore the current tools instead of be dismissive, because they will get better over time. They might be a little bit janky trying to fit them into your workflows right now, but if you don't have a curious mindset and a growth mindset looking towards how I might use these to supercharge myself, I think could really hinder your career growth in technology.
It's like the jump from typewriters to personal computers, right? It's enormous. You don't move along, don't get there.
Curious and growth mindset. That's what we should all get. That's my conclusion for today. I mean, we're reaching nearly the hour. I'm thinking we should leave some time for questions. I tried to touch on some of the questions that were in Slido, but please, put it again in the group chat. And you can vote on the question that you prefer. I think some we touched on. I'm not sure how to remove them, you see, so I'm just gonna have to keep them up there. And then we can touch on some of the questions we haven't answered. There was one around what to use to build dashboard. I think that was aimed at you, Tris, when you said you had dashboards. Maybe you can.
Yeah, so we use Grafana extensively. It's part of the culture that you build dashboards for features. So whether it's acquisitions or authentication, BFF services, there's always availability dashboards for these things. And then measurement dashboards. And we've got a system where you can filter by engineering manager and get a view of their departments, which is quite useful. So you it's sort of on checklist, you go review it in the morning, right? We've got security defects here, or we've got velocity issues here, and we go in and fix them, which is quite nice.
I have so many dashboards and so many different types of technologies. So, for example, tech debt, I've got us looking at that, and I've got a Jira dashboard for that. We use New Relic for the real-time alerting and monitoring and create stuff there. We also have a data team, and they've got loads of dashboards. We have OKR dashboards. We also have productivity metric dashboards. Lots of dashboards.
Thank you. That answered the question. Let's jump into Slido to see if Datadog is quite powerful for mobile. So there was a comment there as well in the message group. I think we touched a bit on the measuring success mobile engineering teams, the Dora and Space metrics, familiarity. We touched a bit on that. Let me just see. Maybe this one could be interesting. How do you let team culture evolve during rapid hiring without losing what made it work in the first place? Anyone fancy answering that?
Yeah, so we did a lot of rapid hiring at Tab and Carter for a while. We have a very strong interview culture. It's pair programming based, and it was standardized across all the different types of technology. So we had one standard that we used to measure people. We also had very strong principles and values and behaviors that we would measure people by. So for example, I say it all the time if you hang out with me, like zoom out. So it's always like, make sure everybody's on the same page, zoom out, give them the why are we here, what the heck are we talking about, make it simple and things like that. So there were behaviors that we would also test for, and how those were determined. And anytime I start my own business, I'm gonna do the same thing. Kind of the first people who were really there and effective early on in the business went through a workshop to determine what their values were, not fluffy ones that are aspirational, but how they actually operate and the things that they do to stand out from other people. And then they use those to measure any new people who came in the future. And I thought that was really effective. And that culture stayed really strong for a really long time. It started to change as we got acquired and I became integrator of teams, like a mixed team of 100 and 175, very different backgrounds, tried to mix in another team of 400, very different backgrounds. So it got a little muddled over time. I think once you start doing M&As, it gets a bit harder to manage that culture.
What I found as well is, so I changed job sort of around 18 months ago into a new team, new department. You know, it's obviously working automatically. One of the things I found really helped was skip levels. So I interviewed everyone on the team, including the designers, the product owners, what their biggest beefs were, what the problems were. I can't talk about all of them, but some of them quite interesting. There was common themes. So I took the two or three biggest themes, and actually, are they set up to succeed? And then introduce some major change, which we did have to do, but it has worked. I think a large part of that is just, it needs to come from within. It needs to be the people saying, here's my feedback, and then condensing that, putting it up on the screen, or going, this is what we're going to do. And we also use Retrobot extensively at NewDay. And one of the exciting things with that is it uses AI to summarize the meeting you've had and what the actions were and what was upvoted and what the key thrust of the theme was. So I find that really helps as well.
Yeah, and that's really interesting, because it's basically like what I call a discovery, where you've gone and interviewed a bunch of people to figure out what are the big pain points we're trying to solve, like a service design sort of problem almost. I've done that as well. Anytime I start a new role or when I came back from maternity, it was really helpful for that.
Yeah, so that's an engineering approach to people, refactoring that. It always works because it pulls us out to it.
What was it like? That reminds me of I forgot the name, the interesting CEO of T-Mobile in the US. For the first week, had a phone in his office where he listened just to support calls to understand where the challenges are. That's it for 2 weeks, just hearing customers complain before taking any decisions and directions. I'm not really sure if we have time for one more question because it's like 56 past. So I think it's better if we stop it here. But I wanted to say a massive thank you to you, Corey and Tris. This was fascinating conversation. Again, thank you, Barry, for organizing this. I hope everyone enjoyed this event. This is kind of us trying to talk a bit more about engineering leadership within the mobile space. The next one will be in person as an on-conference. So I welcome everyone to join us. Please, again, have a wonderful Friday. If is anything you want to add, Corey, Tris, as a last word before we call it?
Just to thank you very much for having me. It was a really great conversation.
Yeah, likewise, really enjoyed it. Yeah, feel free to follow me on LinkedIn and hear more about mobile.
Yeah, so thanks again. Remember, if you want to put your name that you mentioned it into the document that was shared by Chelsea, and then you can connect with everyone. Thank you and have a wonderful weekend, everyone.